so they're running into an issue with that. But yeah, let's go into the SAG after strike. It is done. I did want to talk about that. It ended at 9:58 p.m. last night. So while I was streaming, it ended. I just we didn't see it because I it was I think we were reacting to videos at that time. So yeah, Actors Union reaches tentative deal with Hollywood and TV studios in a historic strike. And yeah, let's see the CNN video.
There's a level of expectation that they have that is just not realistic. And they are adding to a set of challenges that this business.
Wait, what? It's probably okay. So yeah, this isn't the same. That video does nothing. It has nothing to deal with it. Because I was like, that doesn't even. What is going on? We're pleased at how much time we have, well, how much we have accomplished in a short period of time. Yeah, that doesn't. That's not. That's different. Um, but yeah. So Hollywood actors have reached a tentative agreement. Um, yeah, Hollywood actors have reached a tentative agreement with the major film and television studios to end their historic strike. The Actors Union announced Wednesday the strike has shut down production across the industry for nearly 4 months and raised existential questions over the future of the entertainment business. The Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, which represents studios, have been negotiating with the union off and on throughout the year to reach a deal. Both the AMPTP and the actors praised the deal. Now you're gonna hear, since this is CNN, um, you know, and it's not talk like since it's CNN, you uh it's gonna be it's gonna be very biased to the studios because it is a capitalist enterprise. They do not, of course, they don't like the unions at all, even though unions are the reason why you can get paid substantially better than if you are not in a union. You are more powerful. I say this again, as I will always keep saying it. You are more powerful together than you are by yourself. I will say that multiple times. Union President Fran Dresker Drescher called the agreement historic, and the studio's agreement represents a new paradigm. Paradigm. I think that's, yeah, for Hollywood. TV and actors. We did it. The $1 billion deal, three times the last contract. New ground was broke everywhere. Thank you, SAG after members, for hanging in and holding out for this historic deal. Dresker posted on Instagram Wednesday. The strike will officially end at midnight. The union said in a statement concluding one of the longest and most disruptive strikes in Hollywood's history that brought the industry to a standstill. The AMPTP is pleased to have reached a tentative agreement and looks forward to the industry resuming work and telling great stories. The work of telling great stories. The studio said in a statement. Um, Terms of the deal still needs to be ratified by the union members before it can take effect. We're not immediately disclosed. The union said it would not reveal it would not reveal them until the union's board has reviewed the deal. But in a statement to members, the union called the scope of the $1 billion deal extraordinary, noting that it includes significant increases in pay minimums, all protections, and a streaming participation bonus along with better benefits. We arrived at a contract that will enable SAG after members from every category to build sustainable careers. That is amazing. The studio said in their statement that the actors will get the biggest contract on contract gains in the history of the union, including the largest increase in minimum wages in the last 40 years. A brand new residual for streaming programs, extensive consent and compensation protections, and use of artificial intelligence, and sizable contract increases on items across the board. So yeah, pretty good. Everything else we don't. really have to read, yeah, because it's not talking about any. It's not talking about anything. Um, they were saying like it possibly could be like a $5 billion deal, but we don't know the exact numbers because they haven't released them yet. Which they don't have to yet. Um, so yeah, let's see like the WGN news video on this.
Breaking news, looks like the actors' strike is over. The LA Times reporting SAG-AFTRA has approved a tentative deal with the major studios. That contract would boost pay, increase residual payments for streaming, and increase contributions to health and pension plans. It also establishes new rules for artificial intelligence. It has to be approved and ratified by the union members. The actors' strike lasted 118 days.
Nice. Um. So yeah, nice, nice, nice. Very, very nice to know that that's coming to an end. And yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. Um, let's whew, let's get back onto the news.
Many leaders
development. So they want to empty all of northern Gaza. And that is Israeli plan when they open these corridors and they want to push whoever left there down to the south. And that is not helping the Palestinians, it's helping the Israeli plans. So I think that is not in any way helping the Palestinian people cornered under this bombardment in Gaza.
Well, let me ask you then about the response by the international community, because it was pretty damning what he said about what's been done so far.
Yeah.
The US is saying that they asked for 3 days of a pause, and they've been rather given 4 hours. What do you make of that dynamic? Because the US is obviously the only country that has that kind of leverage over Israel.
I think they tried to negotiate with Israel something. The Israelis are adamant about ceasefire.
But what you have to do what you have to do in order for this to happen is it doesn't matter if you ask for a pause for 3 days. You didn't do nearly enough that you could have done. What you could have done was say you give us a ceasefire, or we take away your weapons. We don't send you any more weapons. At that point, Israel will stop. That is true. Israel will stop if we do not give them weapons. So yeah, you didn't try that much. That's what I'm saying. You didn't try. I hate this fact that they're trying to say that the US president tried. No. He didn't try.
They think that.
Well, the Palestinian Health Ministry says 10 people have been killed by Israeli forces in Jenin. Now, this was one of the worst attacks in recent weeks in the occupied West Bank. Israeli forces have been conducting nightly raids there since October the 7th. 176 people have now been killed across the Palestinian territory since then.
It's no Hamas here.
Bernard Smith
This
has
is the
more now
West Bank.
from Jenin in the occupied West Bank.
This is the West Bank. It's
Thursday's raid on Jenin in the occupied West Bank has
Hamas
ended up being
there.
the biggest raid there's been here since October the 7th. And all day, from the early hours of Thursday morning, there have been street battles between Israeli military and...
That's not Hamas. That is literally their military force. They're supposed to be here.
Palestinian armed groups in this refugee camp just on the edge of Jenin city. There's been gunfire and explosions all day and a number of casualties. We know the Israelis have also surrounded...
They technically work as a police force. Also.
3 schools. They've been surrounded all day, and we've spoken to the head teacher at one of the schools, and her children, young children, girls, have not been allowed to leave since this battle started. Israel says, will always say, that it's going after what it calls Palestinian terrorists, but there has been an increase in the ferocity and violence of their raids since October the 7th. And here they'll tell you they think it's revenge. Many of the people arrested or targeted are members of Hamas. Maybe they believe the Israeli security forces are taking an opportunity to deal with unfinished business and weaken Palestinian fighting groups as much as possible, while the rest of the world's attention is focused on what's happening in Gaza. Bernard Smith.
Don't forget what's happening in West Bank at all, because that is also what they're banking on. So that way they can go at the West Bank even harder, to destabilize the West Bank.
Al Jazeera, Jenin, in the occupied West Bank.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron is calling for a humanitarian pause in Gaza.
And also the reason why they're saying humanitarian pause so much is because can't say ceasefire because Israel has decided that that's anti-Semitic. So they decided to say a word that means nothing, a humanitarian pause instead. They decided to say that instead. Because the word actually does inevitably it means nothing. A humanitarian pause. Um, yeah, because what we really do need is a ceasefire. But yes, but we let me see. Actually, I also wanted to play this video of the second thought video of the growing threat of Christian nationalism because um, obviously this isn't in a vacuum. Also, there are a lot of Christians that believe that Israel has a claim to the land and should be there. So I kind of want to debunk that and also, you know, show that Israel is not the Christian and Jewish paradise that um that Netanyahu wants to portray it as. So let's watch that.
And others like it are brought to you by the generous support of my patrons on Patreon. If you'd like to help support this channel, join our growing Discord server, and get early access to every video, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/secondthought.
Hold on, let me get this fixed. Okay.
All right, let's go. I'm here in the heart of Dallas, literally right in the center of the city. Dealey Plaza and the JFK Memorial are right over there. Got the Dallas Symphony Orchestra playing over there. And right over there is the Perot Museum. But right here is First Baptist Dallas. In the summertime, the church holds an event they call Freedom Sunday, a patriotic service blending piety and politics.
That is so insane. That is like such an insane thing to do, like to have. Like I'm just thinking about it. Imagine if you've seen this in Nazi Germany, like with them holding up the Nazi flag, you would say that that's like such a authoritarian, totalitarian thing. But it's insane that no, politics should definitely be along with religion. Like no, I think it should be a little bit separated because I feel like now you're just brainwashing everybody into this one specific ideology.
Imagine a cross between Easter and the 4th of
Which you are. It's literally how the Republican Party gets more people, to be fair.
July, where congregants are decked out in red, white, and blue, wave American flags, cheer at indoor fireworks, and worship to the battle hymn of the Republic just as they would with any traditional hymn. In 2020, the annual service climaxed with Pastor Robert Jeffress preaching to the congregation a sermon titled "America is a Christian Nation," in which he spoke out against the idea that the Founding Fathers intended the country to be a secular nation without religious influence, with church and state totally separate.
That version of American history belongs in the same category as the story of George Washington and the cherry tree. It is an absolute myth. The truth.
Sorry to interrupt. Let me go to it. This just in, Gaza, Paletia, the Gazan journalist that is one of the biggest journalists, has been hacked. Her account has been hacked. Do not send any money or engage with that account. They did put up like a Bitcoin account. Do not engage with that account at all. Until we get an update. Do not do that. Yep. Yep, it says, yeah, Pelosi's account has been hacked. Do not engage or send any donations. We are trying to fix it. Pelosi will never ask for donations. This is dangerous. Zionist bots are trying to hack all of our accounts. Do not engage and report widely. Yeah. So, so that just happened. Um, yeah, about like, yeah, I guess about like a little under an hour ago. So, um, just wanted to say, don't look at that too much. Um, I'm gonna let me see. Okay.
Truth is, America was founded primarily, not exclusively, but primarily by Orthodox Christians. And they founded this country upon the unchanging foundation of God's eternal truth. And furthermore, our founders believed that our success as a nation depended upon our faithfulness to God's.
It's giving. You know what this is giving? It's giving. What's that like huge Republican thing that like what's that called? I think it's CPAC, right? Like where like Republicans and like Christian evangelicals like go to like all go to a convention and they like talk about how how much they hate minorities and how God didn't want minorities here or whatever. Isn't that like what it's about?
Eternal word. Though it is completely politically incorrect to say, the truth is this: America was founded as a Christian nation, and our success as a nation depends upon our fidelity to God's word.
Jeffress's rhetoric is not unique. Services and sermons like this have been held all over the country. It's just one piece that fits into a larger narrative of evangelicalism, revisionist history, conspiracy theories, xenophobia, and grassroots politics that's found its way into the spotlight over the last decade. This unholy marriage of religion and politics is the narrative of American Christian nationalism. That's no doubt a phrase you've seen and heard a lot of. It's an ideology that believes that the US was always intended to be a Christian nation, that it's backslidden into horrid liberal secularism, and that it desperately needs to be reclaimed by Christians and rededicated as a nation for God. And these aren't fringe beliefs either. According to the Pew Research Center, 60% of Americans believe that the founders intended the country to be a Christian nation. 45% believe that it should be one today. And of that 45%, more than half believe that the Bible should influence US law and take precedence over the will of the people. Christian nationalism is the framework that animates these ideas. It's been diagnosed as one of the key components in Donald Trump's victory in 2016. It's been cited as one of the ingredients that led to January 6th. It's no doubt going to play a big role in the 2024 election. We've got prominent Republicans self-identifying.
And also, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is just such an interesting figure in American politics. Like she would definitely be seen as like a psychopath on TV, like on any like reality TV show. You would say like, yeah, she's a psychopath. Like she can't actually be like this. They had to have written her to be like this. Like she is just like a super psychopath. To show you that, she's probably like, saying that Israel needs more weapons now, right? Because she is a Republican. But what she said when the wildfires are happening in Hawaii, she said that it is Jewish space lasers, and that is the reason why. She said that it is Jewish space lasers, and that is the reason why the wildfires are happening in Hawaii. Completely insane and like psychotic and anti-Semitic, but she's somehow not anti-Semitic because she supports Israel? Hmm. Very interesting.
As Christian nationalist, Lauren Boebert is literally calling for the dissolution of the separation between church and state.
That is not how our founding fathers intended it, and I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not.
I know what else you don't want to be separated from if you know what I mean. She was she was getting a little bit too frisky in the movie theater last I recall.
In the Constitution, it was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
And all of this is why some are calling the movement the single biggest threat to religious freedom in the country.
And as someone who isn't religious, but who is interested in religion nonetheless, watching all this play out has been not just troubling, but curious. And part of the reason for that is that there's a war being waged amongst American evangelicals, a group that most people see as pretty unified. But before we get to that, what exactly is Christian nationalism? Is it just regular old conservative Christians gone nuts? Is it the tiny church at the end of your street? Well, not really. It's complicated.
One of the most helpful resources we consulted in understanding what Christian nationalists believe, why they believe it, and what's really going on underneath it all from a historical perspective is this book, Taking America Back for God, by sociologists Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry. Now, this book was published before January 6th and before the 2020 election, but even though the events referenced in the book may not be completely up to date, the conclusions that the authors draw are more relevant than ever. To study the movement, the pair drew data largely from the 2017 Baylor Religion Study conducted by Gallup. Respondents were asked to rate their level of agreement with 6 individual statements to gauge their orientation towards Christian nationalist ideas. And from those answers, they divided people into 4 separate categories across the spectrum: those who reject Christian nationalism outright, those who resist it, who accommodate it, and who act as an ambassador for it. Now, what they found is pretty interesting. Clearly, people are all over the place on this. It's not at all binary. There are people who are fully in support of these ideas, just as there are those who are strongly opposed to it in every respect. But most people are somewhere in the middle, agreeing with a couple points over here, but disagreeing with a couple others over there. Just as interesting and vital in understanding the movement is looking at the demographics of the respondents, because the people who make up these 4 categories are perhaps not entirely who you'd think they'd be. There's a perception that Christian nationalism is just a bunch of white conservative evangelicals, but that's not entirely true.
That's not entirely true because also it is black churches that go to Israel and also end up, being Zionists. Also, it is, some black evangelicals that can, fall into this too. If you look at I believe that is the CPAC conference. Let me look it up. Yeah. Yeah, if you go to this if you go to the CPAC at the CPAC conference, it's not just white people. It's literally it's black people, it's brown people. Like, it doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Oh, I think this whole time I haven't had subtitles for really. So I need to do that. Um, is that?
True. In some ways, Christian nationalists do lean in the directions that you'd probably expect. Those who land in the accommodator and ambassador categories do skew older, white, Republican.
Yeah, and also yeah, it's a lot. It's really crazy. Yeah, because in the Midwest there are a lot of that. There's a lot of that too in the Bible Belt and the Midwest.
They live in the Bible Belt or the Midwest, and they're less likely to be college educated. But to try to claim that's the whole picture is inaccurate. Whitehead and Perry stress this constantly throughout the book. Quote, Christian nationalism and white evangelicalism are not at all synonymous. For example, almost a third of those in the reject column, people who do not agree with the movement at all, identify as Protestant or Catholic. In fact, nearly a quarter of evangelicals overall land in the reject or resist categories. Accommodators and ambassadors skew female, while resistors and rejectors skew male. It's not exclusively white. 65% of Black Americans are either accommodators or ambassadors. It's not even exclusively Republican. Republicans are the majority, of course, but a full 1/3 of respondents who identify as Democrats wound up landing as an accommodator or an ambassador. All this to say, there's way more nuance to the makeup of those in this movement. Yes, there's overlap with conservatism, and there's overlap with evangelicalism, but Christian nationalism is not either of those things in totality. To understand it, you have to look at it as its own individual cultural framework. Within that, I think there are 3 core ideas to understand in order to grasp what Christian nationalism really is. The first is the truth that Robert Jeffress and loads of others have promoted, that America was founded as an explicitly Christian nation, that the Founding Fathers always meant it to be so, and that founding documents like the Constitution are basically just as divinely inspired as the Bible itself. Debating the accuracy of that is less what I'm interested in here. What I am interested in is what emerges from it. What stems from this worldview is the elevation of American into just as important an identity as Christian, and these two things become so tied up with one another, so intertwined, that they're inseparable. To be an American is to be a Christian, and to be a Christian is to be an American. I'm sure you've heard the phrase American exceptionalism before. Well, Christian nationalism just adds this whole other dimension to that. Now,
I feel like it's like yeah, it's probably catching. Okay, so now it should be fine. I don't know why is it catching my voice as much. It shouldn't be doing that. But hey, we're gonna keep going. We're gonna keep going.
America isn't just the greatest country on earth. No, it's the new Israel, where God will establish his kingdom. America is the city set upon a hill that Jesus proclaims in the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, multiple presidents have explicitly labeled the country as such. Americans are God's chosen people, and if you disagree, well, you're just a secular liberal out to squash religious freedom. It's a worldview that clearly doesn't have a lot of nuance to it. It's a very black and white, binary mode of thinking, one that views the world in terms of purity and corruption. America and American values are pure because they're defined by Christian values, and the rest of the world is corrupt and inferior. Quoting Whitehead and Perry, to embrace the cultural values of other nations is inherently
And it's also how America can get away with like demonizing another country, even though that country could have existed longer than America, and could have abided by its laws better than America ever has. It can get away with it because it's like the purest like the purest like perspective, right? That America is always good because it abides by my values as a Christian, but then also these countries are bad in they are inferior and they are below me because they don't have my values for some reason, you think, right? Like for some perceived reason. That America can kind of exasperate in this propaganda, which is done by the media, Fox, CNN, any of them.
polluting, making our society just like the societies from which refugees flee.
And also, don't get me wrong, other countries, can do that too. I mean, that's why, like, if you want to look at Qatari news, like, that's why you see me looking at Al Jazeera because it's better to look at because Al Jazeera has some of the best coverage on it. Also, I would look at like Ireland. If Al Jazeera is too brown for you, look at Ireland. they have great coverage, too. And yeah, they have great coverage. They also, are very pro Palestine. Usually, Irish coverage is very good on this matter. But yeah, if you look at any like any American backed company on like American government like backed a government backed media corporation in America, they're gonna be ostensibly pro Israel. That's just it. They're gonna be pro Israel. They're not taking like a second look at it because that's the government's message. It's kind of like that's why you wouldn't look at Al Jazeera for, let's say, like the Qatar World Cup. You wouldn't look at them for the Qatar World Cup because, yeah, that's their country, so they have certain propaganda they have to spew. A lot of other Western countries will spew like, like pro-Israel propaganda, like France, for instance, right? England, even though it's a lot of people in England and a lot of people in France that do not agree with Israel. They don't. It's the same as here, right? So it you have to think about it in a certain way. Um, yeah, I don't think like I feel like you have to think about it in a certain way, right? That's just it.
What emerges from all this is exclusion and protectionism. Us and them, superior and inferior. We'll come back to this later, but doesn't that kind of seem like it sort of clashes with the whole Jesus being the savior of the world thing? Or, gee, I don't know, the verse in Philippians that says Christian citizenship is in heaven, not earth. Or how about this verse from the book of Acts that says God shows no partiality but accepts people from all nations?
I'm gonna be the first one to tell you. Yeah, a lot of times they don't really. What's funny? All of these verses, if you try to show them to a Christian, they will just say that's like that's a parable. Like it's not supposed to be taken literally. That a citizenship that you have a citizenship in heaven. You're not supposed to take that. The only citizenship is in heaven. You're not supposed to take that seriously. You're supposed to take like everything else seriously, except for this part right here that actually would make you a good person if you had to follow it.
There's a refrigerator magnet style phrase you may have heard of before that gets tossed around in evangelical circles. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Well, Christian nationalism is like a warped version of that. It's Jesus plus America equals everything. But where did this come from? How did this become a thing? Historians are agreed on this. America was not founded as an explicitly Christian country. And the founders were pretty in favor of the whole separation of church and state thing. So how did these ideas become so prominent? Well, there's not really an easy answer, or one particular person or event that started all this. When you start looking into the origins, you find evidence all over the place. I mean, literally, you can go back over 500 years. In 1493, Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull, basically a public decree from the Pope himself, that gave Spain the divine right to discover and conquer non-Christian lands. This is what's called the Doctrine of Discovery, a handful of lines on a sheet of paper that gave Columbus and others like him the
Why does it feel like it's glitching out? Like it really does feel like it's glitching out like a lot, and I don't know why.
sovereign right to assume ownership over lands in the New World. Native Americans? Well, they're more like occupants, not owners. Therefore, the land was free to be both conquered and converted. So all those years ago, we can already see the melding of these ideas. This was like Christ's instruction to go out into all the lands and spread the good news, but with the added benefit of getting to claim those lands at the same time. Good news for the settlers, not so much for the locals. So, hundreds of years ago, we can already see a glimmer of Christian nationalist ideas, and there have been numerous variations of this ever since, this notion that the US is God's kingdom on earth. But what's more pertinent is looking at the times and circumstances in American history when it really gains ground. Jump forward to the 20th century and the years following World War II, and we can see this happening pretty explicitly. This is the second core idea. Christian nationalism is rooted in cultural insecurity. So, it's the late 40s, early 50s. What's going on? the Red Scare.
Are you now or have you ever been a member?
Yep. And they portrayed a lot of the Soviet Union as like, yeah, it had like it was a deeply like you had to be atheist country. Like that was literally like the whole idea of of it. You know, which doesn't make any sense when you realize that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was also a socialist. He called himself a socialist. So that was also a thing that like, you know, kind of messes up that ideal that you know that the whole that all of the you know like all socialists are atheists and they should be, you know, hunted.
Member of the Communist Party.
Communism is this gigantic existential threat to humanity, to the United States, and to Christianity. Plus, you have the regulations and reforms of FDR's New Deal, thought of by industrialists as socialism creeping its way into the country. And in response to the combination of these things, you have all these nationalistic ideas promoting faith, freedom, and American Christian identity rise up. You have the Christian Nationalist Party and the John Birch Society, both formed for the express purpose of combating communist forces who are dead set on destroying religion. You have efforts, albeit unsuccessful, to amend the Constitution to include Jesus' name and declare the United States a Christian nation. In God We Trust is adopted as the official motto of the country. Under God is added to the Pledge of Allegiance. So much of this isn't Christian in theology or even practice, but rather is a weaponizing of religion as a means of pushing back against perceived threats. As Whitehead and Perry put it, Christian nationalism becomes more salient.
And also I do want to say that most countries do not have a national anthem. Like they don't make you stand for the national anthem at school. Like they don't make you do that at school and at like like you know like at games and stuff like that. They don't make you do that in most countries because that would be seen as authoritarian. But like the video that we watched yesterday, it shows that authoritarian is just whoever has the power to say that it's authoritarian, right?
During times of societal unrest. Economic, political, or cultural upheavals cause Americans to fall back on their core identities, traditions, values, and narratives about themselves to bring order out of chaos. In some cases, as with American Christian nationalism, myths, traditions, and identities that were not originally part of the nation's core can be manufactured for the purpose of establishing order. Since the mid-20th century, such manufactured ideas have presented in ways both large and small. For instance, I'm sure you've heard about the moral majority in the 1980s. We've talked about that on the channel before. But there are smaller ways that these ideas spread. One in particular that's interesting is the homeschool movement, which really picked up steam in the 1970s. It's here that you sometimes find curricula built on pseudo-historical ideas of the country's supposed Christian identity. There's a discredited historian named David Barton whose work here is pretty key in propagating these ideas.
We do have a godly heritage in America, but we've been robbed. We have to get involved and take it back. A godly heritage is the foundation of America, and the church must take right ground.
By the time you get to the 21st century and the 2010s in particular.
And honestly, that was the time, especially like yeah, like especially like when 9/11 happened, that was the time when you know, America decided to turn its sights like really against the Arabs, you know, like the Arabic people. Because of how like you can tell the shift because I mean, look at George, like the first George Bush, not H.W. Bush. I'm talking about the first Bush. He literally was praising the Mujahideen and saying that they were brave freedom fighters against the communist scourge. Like, yeah, like you could tell that it was just a huge like flip of a switch because his father wasn't a Democrat. His father was a Republican. But by today's words and how what's going on with Israel, he's he would be and actually yeah he was actually willing he actually got Israel to stop to stop their occupation like to move out. I won't say stop the occupation, but he got Israel to move its settlers from the Gaza Strip by saying we're gonna stop giving you guns. by today's standards, he is George Bush, and I don't even like George Bush like that, but by today's standards, he is ostensibly more to the left than Biden. That's why I'm trying to. I'm saying that to say that Biden is quite literally no different than any of the Republicans since 9/11. He is literally no different.
Particular, it's not too difficult to see the kinds of economic, political, and societal insecurities that have given birth to this most recent strain of the Christian nationalist virus. The financial crash, millions of people losing their homes, their jobs, their livelihoods, the birth of the gig economy, precarious work, labor rights and job benefits being stripped away, wages stagnating. All these things and more contribute to the growth of movements as varied as the Tea Party movement, Christian nationalism, or Occupy Wall Street. They're all animated by a growing discontent that's been simmering for years. Some of these movements, like Occupy, have at least something resembling a sensible class analysis. Others, like Christian nationalism, not so much, instead latching onto the most exclusionary and reactionary interpretations of a religious tradition. To them, the US is backsliding into apocalyptic Sodom and Gomorrah territory.
Which is so funny because it's basically the same, like, that group, the group that we're talking about, the Christian nationalists, are literally the exact same as, um, as any, like, Muslim terrorist group that you might see as bad. They are quite literally the same. They are not any different than that, to be honest.
And God requires the faithful to wage war for his glory. Again, it's all very binary, black and white, good guys versus bad guys kind of thinking. You ever watch the show Lost? This kind of reminds me of that.
We're the good guys, Michael.
Good guys.
Good guys.
Good guys.
Good guys.
We're the good guys. In my experience, the people who go out of their way to tell you that the good guys are the bad guys.
So, American Christians
I mean, you're right. You're right in every sense of the word.
are rendered heroes, but absent a class analysis, the villains in this framework wind up ultimately looking a lot less like DC or Wall Street elites and more like immigrants and members of the LGBT community. That's because the response to cultural insecurity is to insulate. The movement's goals of restoring stability and taking America back.
Because even if you are American, you're not American enough. But this is also how I was talking about earlier, like saying that that fascism is a death cult, and this is how it's a death cult because it always has to insulate. It always has to turn that dial up, on its fascism. It can't stop the killing. It has to always kill someone. So that's literally what happens. That's what happens when you fester all of that hate. You're gonna find someone to kill always. It's when you end a whole population, you're gonna find another population inside of your country to kill once you killed everybody outside. That's it.
Back are just as much, if not more so, about ejecting a perceived outsider as they are about instituting Christian principles at a governmental level. So, historically, who comes along and taps right into that?
Build that wall. Build that wall. Build that wall.
Coincidentally, Biden is finishing building the wall.
Build that wall. Build that wall.
Now, in none of this am I trying to bash Christians or religious people of any flavor. Although I'm not personally religious, I'm not anti-religion by any means. Religion...
I'm not anti-religion, and when I say Christians, usually I'm talking about the Christian nationalists. I'm not talking about like Christians as a monolith, but Christian nationalism at its core is a fascist invention. So, yeah, I'm not like anti-religious. I'm Buddhist. Like, I just don't care if you are. I don't care if if you're Christian, whatever you believe in. I don't really care. It's fine. But you do, it's something that we do need to watch out for. in our day and age now, where yes, somebody could mass shoot a place in the name of Christ or whatever, right? Like that's literally insane. Just don't, and something else I always say is do not push your beliefs onto someone. Like don't push your religious beliefs onto someone else. Do not do that. That is not how you will get anywhere with that. And yeah.
Can be a wonderful thing in a person's life. And weirdly, that's kind of the point that I'm leading to in all of this. Because as the data has shown, this is all actually less of a religious movement and more of a political and cultural one. The God of Christian nationalism isn't so much the Abrahamic God, the God is America.
Back in November of 2015, I ate dinner with one of President Trump's biggest supporters. This person explained to me that America is the last hope of Christianity. That America is the last hope of Christianity. And I thought that I simply misheard. That it could not have been what he was saying. This person was well known as a Christian leader, an apologist for the faith. It simply could not have been true. So I corrected him. He said, "You mean Christianity is the last hope of America, right?" He said, "No, America is the last hope of Christianity." That's Christian nationalism.
This is the great contradiction, the great oxymoron of the whole movement, and the last core idea that leads to understanding it. America is Christianity's savior, not the other way around. This may bear the label Christian, but it's not some new great awakening. Christian nationalists aren't even necessarily religious zealots. They're fanboys, obsessed with a product. That product being the idea of America itself. And actually, the statistics bear this out. One of the most insightful data points of Whitehead and Perry's research is that commitment to Christian nationalism and commitment to genuine religious practice are often completely opposed. Americans who are more religious, who attend church more often, who pray more often, and who read their Bible more often, are actually more likely to support gun control, less likely to ostracize immigrants, less likely to espouse anti-black or anti-Muslim sentiment, and yes, are less likely to vote for Trump. In fact, to quote from this article from The Atlantic, it seems clear that Christian nationalism attracts a lot of adherents who rarely go to church themselves.
That's what I kind of assume that though, because it makes sense that people who who are who are sheltering themselves off, like they're insulating themselves, they become fanboys of like the idea of religion, and like to a point where because they haven't talked to anybody, they don't have any friends, they stop going to places where they could make like-minded friends, like church and stuff like that. They fall like deeper into it's kind of like how like you would see like a video, like a psychology video of like a school shooter, where they'll just kind of dive deep, or like I would say like an incel too, right? They'll dive deeper into their own, into their own deepest, darkest thoughts, and they start to feel comfortable in it because it's comfortable to feel like like you're not at fault. It has to be the whole world doing something to you that is at fault, not you. It cannot be you. That's also another reason that this comes down to too.
A PRRI survey published earlier this year showed that only 54% of Christian nationalists, and just 42% of those who are sympathizers with the ideology, attend church regularly. Time and again, Whitehead and Perry write, where Christian nationalism zigs, religious practice zags. Now, clearly there are still a lot of religious zealots in the movement, but to me, this is kind of the punchline in all of this. If the research here is correct, Christian nationalism isn't very Christian. This isn't about spreading the good news, it's about gaining political power, and it's doing so by hijacking the Christian label. And you know what the most demonstrative image of all that is, that sums it all up? It's Donald Trump in 2016 standing in front of a crowd, holding up a Bible and acting as though it's the most precious thing in the world to him, and then opening it up and mispronouncing the name of the book he's reading from.
2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17. That's the whole ball game. Where the
That's the whole ball game. This this man, he deserves a Truman Show esque show.
Spirit of the Lord, right? Where the Spirit of the Lord.
Now, you remember how I mentioned earlier that there's a war being waged amongst American evangelicals over all this? Well, there's been quite a lot of activity from a lot of folks in that arena, writing and speaking out against Christian nationalism. Big conservative evangelical names like Russell Moore, Timothy Keller, and writers at sites like the Gospel Coalition. And so to end all of this, I wanted to talk with someone to give us more of an on-the-ground approach. Hey Jay, hey man, how you doing?
And yeah, they feel like they, and I definitely think those, like, those evangelicals that did speak out about it, they're basically saying that they're going too far. I feel that's probably what's going on there too.
Pretty good. How are y'all?
Good, we're just getting a few more things set up here. So I got connected with AJ Shortley, a preacher from Atlanta who also runs a new channel here on YouTube called The Holy Shift Show. And I think his perspective on all of this, and on how Christian nationalism perverts Christianity, is really valuable.
And see, I might, like, I don't know. I probably could never get this this video, right? Like I could never get this like I could probably never get this video, so that's why I like to see videos of where people are talking to um actual actual Christians that are super are super well versed in in their scripture, which is I feel like that's that's cool. You do know a lot, so I feel like I will want to ask you a little some questions on what on the thoughts of Christian on Christian nationalism and how detrimental that can be to to the religion as a whole.
The language of the gospel itself, where it talks about the good news of the Son of God, actually is riffing on some of the language that the empire used to use for the emperor. So when a new emperor was born, it would make a proclamation to the Mediterranean world that the good news of the Son of God has been born, this emperor, Augustus or Caesar or whatever. And so when the gospel starts using that language, it's saying that, okay, the center of the empire, imperial power, is not your savior, and salvation actually comes from the margins. For God to.
And also, I want to say historically, it is a big Christian socialist movement too in America. Um, you can definitely find some, at least one of your churches near you.
Say that the Savior is born in Nazareth, which was on the margin of Israel, and Israel itself was on the margin of the Roman Empire, is to say that imperial power and the central power is not the place where salvation and wholeness and healing and freedom is going to come from. It's just not going to come from the centers of power.
How has it been engaging with your congregation on these topics? Have they been open to having their opinions changed? Are they aware that some of these beliefs they hold may be in contradiction to the Bible? Have you met any resistance there?
In my experience, which of course is limited, social location can have a pretty significant factor on how open someone is to criticizing American structures.
And also another thing too, when it comes to like how I was talking about earlier, the social aspect of these places, of just churches, mosque and stuff like that, the social aspect of it can um can brighten the mood, right? It can if a person thinks everyone is out to get them and nothing is going right, if they go outside and they actually talk to people and they start noticing hey, nobody's out to get me, I definitely was wrong. That is how you can learn explicitly from this. That's how you can learn to just that's how these people can learn to just to come back into society and not not be like, not tip that border to where they're becoming a religious zealot, if you catch my drift.
And so if you're studying scripture and analyzing, what America looks like from a biblical perspective, if people find themselves in a socially and economically marginalized place in life, they tend to be less resistant to critiquing America, for obvious reasons, I think. Those who find themselves in more central places socially and economically in American life are much more resistant to offering critiques of America, because
And that's also, I mean, I think he's gonna say it, but that's also because um you feel that the system is working in your favor. You feel that the American system is working in your favor. Um, if you are more like stable and or if you're affluent, you definitely think that the system is more in your favor. So you don't want to change that system in fear that you're going to lose money, and lose your stability.
they would then be critiquing the status quo, which they're benefiting from. So there's some incentive there to not critique America or structures in that way. So it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes people get really defensive and don't want to hear anything about the critique of America in any way whatsoever. To critique America would be to critique the gospel itself. But even those who are central, even those who are more central socially and economically in the culture, they're still willing to grapple with it and think about how America could do better and all this stuff. But typically what I've seen is that even no matter how much critique someone is willing to give of American structures, if the narrative starts shifting towards people who are experiencing financial hardship are not experiencing it because they have made some sort of huge mistake or have made some sort of huge failure, but it's more of a structural reason that people experience financial hardship, that's sort of like an off limits way to look at things.
Is there a particular passage you would point to from the Bible to help a congregant understand that maybe some of these beliefs that they hold within Christian nationalism are opposed to the teachings of the Bible?
So specifically with Christian nationalism, Acts 15 is about as explicit as it gets. Acts 15 is a part of the story where the early church had been spreading, and a lot of non-Jewish people had been coming to the faith in Jesus as the Messiah. And so the early church generated this question, okay, well, what do we do with all these non-Jewish people flowing into the faith? Are we saying that they're automatically a part of our community of God now? Or are we saying that they need to also adopt Jewish custom and law for themselves in order to consider themselves part of us, part of the community? And the very, very clear answer that Acts 15 gives is that no, Gentiles do not need to become Jewish in order to be reconciled with God. And that, I think, touches on the heart of Christian nationalism, because
And it touches on the fact that you don't have to preach to someone to like change their religion. You don't have to preach that. Because if they don't want to, it shows right there that they can still get into heaven as long as they're doing good things.
no one needs to be American to be reconciled with God. No one needs to be American or some version of American or some version of anything at all, anywhere, period, to be considered as loved and reconciled to God. Because that's just not the message of Scripture. The message of Scripture is that God's love is absolutely universal and given to all people without any preconditions whatsoever. And it's an invitation to participate in relationship with God and God's love in bringing healing and goodness and life and mutuality and support and love to the world. It's not about being in the right, in group by any stretch of the imagination. There's a little story in Galatians 2 where Peter, who was a disciple of Jesus, and this is after Acts 15 in the Jerusalem Council, where Peter used to eat with Gentiles in Antioch, which was to the north, and he didn't have any problems with it. But sometimes some representatives from the church in Jerusalem who were obviously, Jewish believers in Jesus as the Messiah would come to Antioch to check on things and, fellowship probably and just stay connected in different ways. And one time when Paul and Peter are there, Peter got up from the table that he was sitting at with Gentiles and sharing a meal with them because some representatives from the church in Jerusalem arrived. And he gets up and leaves because he doesn't want those the Jewish believers to see him eating with Gentiles. And Paul absolutely loses his mind over this. And actually, he says that Peter's action in doing that calls into question the very truth of the gospel itself. And so in places like that and in places all over the place in Paul, you can see that the center of the gospel is kind of this overcoming superiority complexes, where we're not looking down on others, that we are all equally loved and invited by God to participate in the fullness of life, which is connection to God and connection to others. And that in my mind is very much against what Christian nationalism teaches and thinks.
That is a perfect answer, I think. And I think that's actually a great spot to end the episode. So AJ, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you all.
We'll see you.
See you.
I mentioned at the beginning of the episode that videos like these are made possible thanks to my patrons on Patreon. Now that Second Thought is a full...
We're watching the ad. We're watching the ad is going to be... Yeah, the video came out 5 days ago. Of course we're going to watch that.
Fully independent operation again, Patreon is the single best way you can support the work we're doing here. We actually just moved into a new little office space, which you saw some of in today's video. It's been really cool to start building it out into a proper studio for all our projects. But it's also another expense we have to manage. We're a small team, we don't have industry backing, and we only have one reliable sponsor now because we're serious about only collaborating with people we think are doing good work. If you'd like to help keep this channel afloat and get some great perks while you're at it, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every patron, regardless of donation amount, gets early access to every video, plus access to our patrons-only Discord. It's a really great place to hang out. We've got everything from a recommended reading list, to a book club, to a dedicated role for educated users who are willing to answer any question you could ever think to ask about socialism. Anyway, we enjoy being independent, but it's also a little nerve-wracking. So if you like what we're doing here and you're able to chip in even $1 a month, we would greatly appreciate your support. You can join the Discord, get early access, and support principled socialist content by visiting patreon.com/secondthought. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping